Welcome, and thank you for joining us for the first Agro Launch and Learn webinar of 2022. This webinar series is only possible through the generous support from your friends Agro Science Services. We thank your friends very much for their continuing sponsorship. My name is Amanda Chen, Executive Committee Member for the ACS Agro Division. I will be serving as moderator for today's webinar. Attendees will be able to submit their questions for the speakers via the Q&A tool. It'll be at the bottom of your screen. We have about 5 minutes Q&A at the end of the presentation, and all the questions will be answered during the time. Before I introduce our speakers, I like to take a moment to highlight the benefits of becoming an AGRO member. AGRO pays enormous benefits by enhancing your science, building your scientific network, and supporting your professional development. So please go to the AGRO website at agrodiv.org and click on Become a Member. The cost is less than $20 a year, and you don't have to be a member of the American Chemical Society to join as an affiliate member. I also like to remind you about the upcoming ACS for National Meeting in Chicago this August. Both the conference and AGRO programming will be hybrid. The abstract submission deadline is March 14, which is less than a month away. Dr. Heidi Eric is our program chair this year. Please contact Heidi if you have any questions. And also keep in mind that more AGRO Launch and Learning webinars will be coming this year. The next webinar will take place on March 16. Detail of the webinar will be posted soon on AGRO website. Please look out for it. Now I'm proud to introduce our speaker, Thuy. Thuy is the founder and CEO of Thuy Consulting. She is also the Director of Compliance and Regulatory Affairs at Hemp Enterprises. Thuy earned her bachelor degree in microbiology from University of Rochester. She worked at the Department of Public Health and Environment, Public Health Inspection Division for the City and County of Denver for 5 years. She was also a senior public health investigator. There, she established her specialty in cannabis and hemp industry. In 2015, she became the director of infused product at LiveWell. In 2016, she founded Thuy Consulting to offer consulting services for cannabis and hemp operations in various aspects, including compliances, safety, regulatory engagement, sustainability, and environmental stewardship. Thuy has provided various cannabis training to many government agencies. Currently, Thuy is working with the New Mexico Environment Department in collaboration with the New Mexico Regulation and Licensing Department in the drafting of emergency cannabis regulations. And now we welcome Thuy to start her talk, What's Happening in the YY West of the hemp and cannabis industries. The floor is yours, Thuy.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for introducing me and inviting me to present for the very first AGRO Lunch and Learn for 2022. I'll go ahead and get into the presentation, and Amanda had already comprehensively introduced my background, so I won't go into that any further. I'll skip a couple of slides. So a couple of different things that I'd like to bring up is when I was a health inspector for the City and County of Denver, I was the first regulatory inspector who conducted a foodborne illness outbreak in conjunction with cannabis-infused products, and it was at our very first worldwide pot pavilion in the Denver County Fair, and it was a foodborne illness investigation because it included 2 or more individuals who had gotten sick by consuming cannabis-infused chocolates. They were actually supposed to give out only regular chocolates, but it was being manufactured in a marijuana facility, and they inadvertently switched infused chocolates for uninfused chocolates, started giving out infused chocolates at the Pot Pavilion, and both adults and children got sick. Children got sick because the adults brought the chocolates home to their kids and gave it to their kids. And I believe it was over 12 individuals who had gotten sick. So the significance of this is it was the very first foodborne illness outbreak in conjunction with marijuana infused products. And this case study actually became publicized and taught to other public health officials and public health nurses as they were trying to educate themselves on what to do for foodborne illness investigations concerning cannabis. So I am, let's see here. Oops, sorry about this. So what I specialize in is compliance certification, and I work with USDA. I work with various organic certifying bodies along with ISO 9001. I've actually assisted with other agencies and companies in ascertaining their ISO accreditation along with kosher certifications and CGMP. Back in 2019, when FDA did invite different people from the industry to present on cannabis, I was one of the, I believe it was a little bit over 100 individuals who were selected to come and present to the FDA so that we can get the ball rolling on requesting guidance and regulation and really just assistance from the federal government. And the reason being is because currently every single state that is legal, they have different programs, they have different regulations. Some have medical programs, some have recreational programs, and then some have hemp programs, and some have all three. There's no standardization between the various states. And, with having the FDA lead the charge alongside USDA for the cultivation of hemp specifically, we're hoping to standardize that. But thus far, there has not been any guidance from FDA, with the exception of indicating that hemp-infused products are not approved in various common foods that are currently in commerce. So I'm going to go into kind of defining what the difference is between marijuana and hemp. So they're both cannabis sativa. However, the difference is really in the THC concentration, or the delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. If you look at the definition of marijuana, it states all parts of the plant, cannabis sativa, whether growing or not, the seeds thereof, the resin extracted from any part of such plant, and every compound, manufactured salt, derivative, mixture, or preparation of such plant, its seeds and resin. And industrial hemp, or hemp, is defined as the plant of the genus cannabis in any part of the plant, whether growing or not, containing a delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol concentration of no more than 0.3% on a dry weight basis. So this definition is actually very troubling in the sense that when we are speaking of hemp, this definition can be applied towards plant material and also can be applied towards the finished products. However, during processing, the THC, or delta-9 THC concentration, does exceed the 0.3% as an intermediate ingredient or processing step. So therein lies the problem in terms of how are we going to regulate it. So I'm actually from Colorado, so I can talk to you specifically about how Colorado proceeded, which was, so long as the products that are manufactured do not exceed 5% delta-9 THC, it can be transferred in between different licensed hemp facilities without having to obtain a marijuana license. And it can never go into commerce or never be sold to the public. unless it meets the standard of identity, which is 0.3% THC. So I'm going to touch on that a little bit further down in the presentation, but overall, this presentation is really just to give you an idea of, how hemp and or marijuana is grown, and the processing, and then some of the food safety challenges and current challenges that we face, not only in Colorado, but throughout the nation. So for those of you who haven't been able to visit a grow facility, usually what happens is, if you'll see in the bottom left-hand corner, I don't know if, can you see my arrow at all? If I'm pointing to anything?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, great. Okay, so so generally, this right here are seeds, and just bear in mind that hemp seeds, marijuana seeds, or cannabis seeds, they do look exactly the same. You can't really tell the difference. And generally, when we are propagating cannabis plants, you'll see here that we are cutting stems from the mother plant, and it's in a vegetative state, meaning it has not flowered. And we will be cutting or cloning these stems and then placing them into little plugs, or however it is that they decide to grow it. It's generally not grown from seeds, and there's a couple of different reasons for that. One of the reasons is you can't confirm or verify the sex of the seed. What you want is, you want to have a feminized seed, or you want a female plant, so that you can grow the flowers. They're a lot more robust. The male plants generally, they might have a little bit of a flower, but not enough where you would be able to extract and harvest the cannabinoids from the plants at high yields. So in this, these photos, these are all from cannabis operations. And what you'll see here are different tags. These are metric tags. This is something that is not required in Colorado for hemp plants. I know that different states have different regulations. I know that Oregon does regulate cannabis very similarly to hemp. It's all under the same regulatory agency. However, in Colorado, hemp is regulated more like a food/dietary supplement, and then marijuana is regulated as cannabis. So I just wanted to show you some of the tracking capabilities that are required in states that have different programs and different regulatory agencies for basically the same genus, the same species. The only difference is really the THC, or the delta 9 THC concentration. You'll have to excuse me. I will generally say THC. However, there are so many different THCs out there now. You can't really just say THC. You have to specify delta 9 THC, or just call it delta 9, and we know what you're talking about. So a quick rundown of the cannabis plant, which, for those in the audience, I'm sure you're well aware. So I'm not going to go into it in too specific detail, other than the fact that when we are extracting the plant, we're not really interested in the fan leaves here. The fan leaves don't have a lot of the trichomes. The trichomes really are found on the cola, or on the flower, which is generally what is smoked. Well, that's generally what is harvested. And then you will also see sweet leaves, which are smaller than the fan leaves. So they're closer to where the buds or the flowers are. And they do generally have trichomes as well, and they call them sweet leaves. This photo right here, you'll see, is generally something that you might find on a male plant. Again, you're not going to have the same type of cola. You're not going to have the same type of trichomes. Will there be some? Yes, absolutely, but not to the degree that you will have in the female plant. And this is the reason why we opt to either use feminized seeds, which, again, it's not 100%, or they will take cuttings from the mother plant, and that will guarantee not only the genetics, but also guarantee that it is a female plant, so you don't have to come back and cull the male plants. And the reason why also is because we don't want for the male plants to potentially create seeds with the female plant. So what you'll see here is seeds on a female plant, and when a cola or a flower has seeds, it doesn't have the same value at retail. It also could cause issues when they are extracting, depending upon their extraction process, and of course produce a lower yield. Some plants actually will have both the male and female parts. And so, and what industry will call it is they'll call it herming out, or they're hermaphroditic. So they will self-pollinate. And if they do self-pollinate, then obviously if you're growing inside a large warehouse, you don't need more than one in order to cross-pollinate, against the entire lot that you have in there. And then of course, you're not maintaining the genetics either. One issue that I found when I was in the cannabis industry was the use of different hormones and different chemicals to minimize or to prevent these plants from herming out. And it was something that, as an inspector, unless you know what you're looking for, and as a health inspector, where we just inspect retail food and manufactured foods, we're not generally out in the field, or we don't fully understand agriculture or the cultivation of different agricultural commodities or the chemicals that are used. And so we don't necessarily fully understand what is allowed and what isn't allowed. I got a lot of my training from the fire department, the Denver Fire Department, because we worked hand in hand trying to educate ourselves on the various pesticides obviously that were used. And again, that's not my expertise, that's not my language. However, by doing our investigation and looking at every single chemical that was on site, what we ended up doing was, I'm going to pop to the screen real quick. What we ended up doing was we were finding the different pesticides that were being used. And I know that, you're very familiar with, some of these that are being listed. So Eagle 20, that's myclobutanol. They were using merit, mallet. And these photos are obviously from very early on. This is back in probably 2013, Denver 2013. So whenever I speak to different states, I'll try to reference, not only when it was legalized. So it was legalized in Colorado in 2010. And we've progressed since then, but, and we've progressed even further, but these were from, 2013. And this is actually when we understood a little bit more about the agricultural side. When I started inspecting, we weren't asked or even really told to go into the cultivation to inspect these operations to see how they're cultivating. What we worried about was the manufacturing process. So that's really what we did. And in Colorado, we have the Department of Agriculture that handles the agricultural side, and then the health department who handles any sort of processing, manufacturing, finished goods, things like that. So, and then of course, back in 2013, we didn't have hemp in Colorado. This is strictly cannabis or strictly marijuana. And it's we do have different agencies that handle different, have different regulatory authorities in Colorado. So it's a little bit complex, but herein lies, when myself and the fire department were educating ourselves on how they were, conducting these, cultivations and how they were growing it. The big thing that really caught the fire department's eye was obviously sulfur. So elemental sulfur. Although it's not something that they would generally regulate, it's because it's being used within a warehouse, and there are standards with respect to how you can apply and how you can use elemental sulfur inside a warehouse, where what they were doing was they were using it in a warehouse that was full of people. You're not allowed to do that against fire code, against building code. And then that really was what opened the door for us to start discovering the other pesticides that they were using. And so myself and the Denver Fire Department were the ones who first determined the illegal pesticide usage. And that was actually a lot of fun, but also I will say when we determined that and we introduced it to the MED, the Marijuana Enforcement Division, and really tried to educate them. The Marijuana Enforcement Division is more concerned with licensing, traceability, making sure that there's no product diversion. There was a very small section, a couple of paragraphs on food safety, but other than that, there wasn't really anything. And then at that point in time, the Colorado Department of Agriculture was not involved in any cannabis operations. As you all know, for regulators, if there isn't regulatory authority for them to investigate or enforce or even, inspect these facilities, and they're actually not allowed to go in. And it wasn't until 2015 that the CDA, or Colorado Department of Agriculture, where they started actually going into these cannabis operations, taking samples of different plants and also investigating the different uses of pesticides. And that really started the motion of, hey, let's list the acceptable pesticides for use in the cannabis industry, because we all know that that is not something that is listed on any of the labels allowing for it. And the best that regulators can do for the industry to ensure that they are not breaking any EPA laws or rules was to look at the label. And if the label was general enough and didn't say that you couldn't use it, but was general enough that you can apply it to other crops and other agricultural commodities outside of what was listed, then that was what was accepted. Might not be the best way to go, but that's kind of where we're at. And as far as I know, to this day, we do not have any pesticides that are approved for cannabis applications. So I wanted to get into what the CDA regulates a little bit more. Again, they just regulate the cultivation of industrial hemp. They have nothing to do with the marijuana industry. If needed, I'm sure that they would provide their expertise, but at this point in time, it's really, dependent upon the jurisdiction. And again, this is very specific to Colorado, very specific to even the municipality, because, even as I was working at the health department, I worked for the city and county of Denver. The state health department did not have regulatory authority to come in and inspect cannabis operations for manufacturing processes. The local municipalities were the ones who would dictate whether or not they would actually inspect these manufacturers for food safety. And Denver was the only municipality that was inspecting. I was spearheading Denver and going into all of these facilities, and just really understanding what processes were being used. It was a new world to me. Didn't understand anything about how they were extracting or refining or just doing any of that. So I do want you to understand that even though there are states out there that have these different programs, they may not have a robust group or division, or even individuals who are trained to understand the full scope of the life cycle of the cannabis and or industrial hemp plant, from cultivation to finished products, because it could be very intricate. These are just some photos of what you would generally find in marijuana grow operations. When you have plants that grow outdoors, they're very hardy, and they have they are able to fight off a lot of different pests, and they don't generally as what you find when you grow them inside an enclosed building with ventilation that just kind of recycles the air throughout the entire building. And if it was a building that housed different manufacturing processes previously, a lot of times there's contamination within the ventilation that then gets sprinkled on these plants. So we'll have powdery mildew, we'll have different pests, we will have bud rot, we'll have mold, we'll have just all sorts of really fun things that will pop up. And what does the industry do with this type of product? Generally, because it's so expensive to grow, because you have your grow lights, you have to control the humidity, you have to control the CO2 levels within the facility, because you're pumping these warehouses full of carbon dioxide, and just obviously the manpower to not only propagate but also cultivate and feed and water these plants. It's extremely expensive, and so when you have plants that are unadulterated or adulterated, or plants that have these diseases, what you would think is it would be thrown away, it would be disposed of, but that does not happen. That does not occur. These contaminated plants generally become, they're just put together and they're extracted. And, a lot of times the industry, what they expect or what they assume is, well, I'll be using, these solvents, and these solvents will kill off anything that's on the plant, and it won't be concentrated, and it won't be, it won't be found in the concentrate once I finish processing it with these various hydrocarbons or non-hydrocarbons or whatever it is that they're extracting it with. And then with further refinement, it can be quote unquote cleaned. Now, I'm sure you're all very aware, when you test for products, sometimes you find the things that you look for and sometimes you don't. But also you will never find anything that you're never looking for. So if an operator is using a solvent or using a chemical that is generally not tested for, that is something that will never be detected in the CFAs or the certificates of analysis. It will never be reported. And it's just something that, is a dirty little secret of the industry. And I can't even say that it's anything that is not currently happening, because, you want to save your crop. I'm sure, some of you will be inquiring as to, well, isn't there regulations on what they can use? Yes, of course there is. And isn't there a requirement to test? Of course there is. And are they required to, have somebody come in and sample the specimen? Not necessarily. It's usually the operator who pulls the specimen. And it's very easy, even with all of this track and traceability, to handpick your specimen that will be sent into the laboratory, because it will give you a good test result. So I want to say that everybody's going to do the right thing, but I can't necessarily say that, because there are good players and bad players in every industry. So back in, so I before I left the health department in Denver, I actually conducted a lot of training with the various regulatory agencies, and I conducted, really what I was doing, I was sharing my knowledge to not only the various local municipalities, but also, different states, so that I can share what I've learned. And, what I've learned back then, obviously, I know a lot more now. And it wasn't really until 2017 that CDPHE, or Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, where they decided, okay, we're actually going to start regulating hemp now, even though it had been a thriving industry since 2014 in Colorado. And at that point in time, I was educating and training them on, all things cannabis, all things hemp. And I believe it was I'm thinking it was either 2020 or 2019 when CDPHE rolled out the regulations for hemp, for industrial hemp and the processing of it. And then we also worked very closely with the Colorado Department of Agriculture in drafting regulations to submit to USDA for Colorado's plan, so that we can regulate hemp within our state. So in Colorado, we have various agencies that regulate the same plant, essentially. So CDPHE will regulate the manufacturing and processing and labeling of any sort of hemp products. Colorado Department of Agriculture, CDA, will regulate the cultivation, and only the cultivation. Once you harvest it, once you do any sort of processing, that goes straight to CDPHE. As much as I would like to say, oh yeah, that's an easy way to determine responsibilities, you will find that sometimes there's processing on the farm, and CDPHE isn't necessarily notified that there's processing. And processing can be, obviously more than just, harvesting the plant and processing it into smaller bits through a combine or whatever it is. I mean, there could be extraction happening on the farm. There can be, just let's just say like picking of, the different leaves for, say, tea. And that's a part of processing. That's not something that CDA doesn't necessarily regulate. For cannabis, we have the Marijuana Enforcement Division, MED, and they oversee everything cannabis from cultivation all the way to finished product. They are starting to have more interaction and more understanding and training on food safety concerns for the manufacturing, so that they can apply that across the entire scope of, cannabis, from extraction to refinement to finished goods. So we do have that aspect of it, but they don't work with CDPHE to understand what is the hazard and what isn't. So one good thing that MED has done is they actually have been hiring previous health inspectors, and also bringing on consultants that are health inspectors or were health inspectors to help educate their investigators as they're going through these operations. So, we have a pretty fractured fractured industry, or fractured regulatory structure with respect to the different commodities, but there is a lot of talk between the different agencies at this point in time. Like, what do you do with products that are exceeding the 0.3% threshold? Because technically that's marijuana. And then what are you doing with the different products that are synthetic or synthesized? And I'll get into that a little bit further. I just wanted to show you a quick slide on generally what is tested, what is required for testing, and this goes across the board for both cannabis and for hemp. So, we'll test for microbial, and, I'm listing out what Colorado requires. However, just understand that different states have different requirements in terms of testing. They also have different requirements in terms of thresholds. So in Colorado, we'll have the requirement for potency testing, microbial, you'll have mycotoxins, heavy metals, pesticides. You'll have pesticides listed, and every single state has a different set of pesticides. There's no standardization, no continuity. If you want to do interstate commerce for hemp, obviously you cannot have interstate commerce for marijuana. It's just very, different in every single state. And for hemp operators who are trying to have interstate commerce, or manufacture in one state and sell in another, you have to determine, okay, how do I meet the regulations within my own state, and what sort of regulations do I have to meet for, let's just say, Florida. They might have very similar testing requirements, but now you have to test to meet the Colorado standard. Now you have to test to meet the Florida standard. You look at the labeling requirements. How do you label this? If you are labeling in-house in Colorado, you have to meet the Colorado requirement, but you might be shipping to Florida, and then Florida has a different labeling requirement. So there's just a lot of confusion in the industry. There are a lot of operators that actually do want to comply, a lot of operators that want to do what's best for not only consumers, but also for their own company, and also to help elevate the industry and have it really acknowledged as a real industry. And it's very difficult when every single state is fractured and every state is different, and we all get the same message from FDA, which I understand where FDA is coming from. They do need the time to gather the information, and you don't want to put the cart before the horse by providing guidance when you're still pulling information in. But it's such a dynamic industry with so many different technologies, and really it's very fascinating, because what you'll find is, the cannabis and the hemp industry, they've been able to adopt technologies from a lot of different industries, like from the pharma industry, from the dietary supplement industry, from oil and gas. And, they'll look at different technologies and they'll see if that's something that can be applied within the industry to either have a better extraction with higher yield or a cleaner extraction, or can we clean this, product that we run through, this solvent, and or this product has, such and such pesticide, and how is it that we can clean the concentrate? Because again, it's a very expensive commodity, and so they want to make sure that they can utilize every single ounce and every single part of the plant, and so it's difficult when you're a regulator and you're trying to keep up with the times, but it's just moving so fast. And it might be that you're trying to learn only within your state because you don't have guidance from anybody else. So, I'm trying to give you an idea of what it is if you're in the industry and only operating within one state. But also, if you don't, have anything to do with the industry, you can kind of appreciate the complexities of how various states are trying to regulate it. And of course, FDA too, like props to them to at least acknowledge the fact that, it's something needs to be done. But I completely understand why they're kind of holding off on moving forward. This is just a list of different types of operations that do require registration for hemp specifically. Now, in Colorado, this is what's required. So if a lot of times, if you're a repacker, if you're a brand owner, if you're a retailer, whatever it is, you have to be registered with the state. I cannot say that every single state has this requirement. And so there, you're going to break that chain of custody, so to speak. You won't know where something was manufactured or how it's manufactured or who's distributing it if you don't require the registration of all these different commodities. And I'm hoping that a lot of states are still, kind of taking note of what Colorado is doing, even though we were not as fast at rolling out the hemp regulations. We are very interactive with the state. I work very closely with CDPHE, and they really do try to involve the industry in what's coming on down the pipeline. They want to hear how it will impact the industry if they decide to set forth or require certain regulation, or even how a regulation is written, because we all know that you may write the rules one way, but how is it interpreted? How can it be interpreted? Is this a loophole or is it clear enough? And so I really do applaud CDPHE with working very closely with the industry. This is a very quick flow chart, just to show you how processing and manufacturing generally works. And this is very similar to what you will find in the cannabis industry as well as the hemp industry. So obviously you'll have your plants, and you can either have germinated or cuttings, germinated seeds or cuttings in order to propagate. You're gonna have a vegetative stage where there's no flowers, and then you'll have a flowering stage. Depending upon the state that you live in, if you are cultivating outdoors and how much sunshine you have, you might be able to get maybe 2, 3, 4 crops a year. It just really depends, and it depends on obviously how long it takes to fully grow the plant to the flowering stage and it's mature before you harvest it. So you can have several different harvests. In Colorado, we only have one because we have a very short season where we can grow and before it snows. And then if you're growing indoors, then that's just a cycle that you have throughout the entire year. You're not impacted at all by the weather. And, again, depending upon what that life cycle is for that plant, you might even be able to push out 5, 6, different harvests of the same cultivar, because maybe it just doesn't have as long of a flowering or vegetative stage. So that's kind of a difference between hemp and marijuana. You're going to harvest the plants, you're going to process it, and then you're going to pack it. Now, sometimes you keep it for your own processing, or sometimes you sell it. And once it's received, there's always going to be an extraction process. There could be further refinement You can decarboxylate it. You can also process it into further concentrates here. And then these concentrates, along with even some of the raw hemp extract, meaning the undecarboxylated, the extract that still has the waxes and all of the chlorophyll and all the components. It just kind of depends on how they want it, in a raw hemp extract, or like I said, you can further refine it. But any of these concentrates can be added into various different commodities. So this is a list in Colorado of what is and isn't allowed. Again, it's going to vary from state to state. Utah actually allows for basically the same types of solvents that are allowed for dietary supplements. I wanted to show you this photo because you'll see the difference between the different plants. This right here is industrial hemp. When there's processing at the farm of industrial hemp, generally, except for the very large stem, you're going to have the entire plant, and obviously minus the roots, you're going to have the entire plant processed, and it'll look something like this in order for them to extract. In the cannabis industry, it'll be more green generally, and a lot of times it's because it's fresher. Not to say that this isn't fresh, but you'll see, more of a brown because you have other parts of the plant as well. So this is mechanically separated plant material that will be further extracted. And then this here, what you see is sweet leaf. Sweet leaf, again, is just when it's just handpicked or clipped off of the flower or the cola. And then instead of wasting this material, it will be further extracted because they do contain trichomes so that you can extract and get as much of the cannabinoids as possible. So in Colorado, we allow for solventless extractions, and you'll see here, they'll do a dry sieve or sifting of the plant, which is just essentially drying out the plant and running it through different levels of sieves and collecting the trichomes. You can use dry ice, so you would freeze the plant, and again, you can just kind of shake it out through different levels of sieves or micron filters to separate the different trichomes and different plant material. You can use hot water, cold water extraction. That's considered solventless because it actually does not dissolve any of the trichomes or any of the cannabinoids. It's just a mechanical separation using water as your, medium to extract the plants or extract the trichomes. And with cold water extractions, generally that's going to be with ice. So they'll freeze it and they'll use ice. And there was an investigation that I had done, and actually a recall of a product that I had done because they were doing cold water extraction inside a washing machine that was rusted, and there was mold in the washing machine as well as mold in the tubes. I don't believe I have the video in this presentation. However, if you have followed the cannabis industry, and this was back in, I believe I did that recall back in 2014 when I was still with the health department. It was all over the news where, this guy was pushing out his washing machine because I told him that he couldn't use it. And, I just needed him to, to remove all of the unapproved equipment. And we did end up recalling all of the product because we weren't entirely sure how clean it was since it was running through a rusty, moldy machine. And then you have the heat press. So think of that as a t-shirt press. Think of that as I'm going to say it because we actually use it in the industry, a flat iron. So in the industry, if they're trying to do small amounts, they will use either a t-shirt press or they will use a flat iron, in between, say, parchment paper to extract, the cannabinoids from the plant. Non-hydrocarbon solvent extractions, what you'll see is you'll have ethanol, isopropyl alcohol, acetone, and CO2. So you can use it. They don't define how you use the CO2. You can use it subcritical, supercritical, however you want to use it. But as long as it's food grade or beverage grade CO2, you can do that. Now, these generally aren't used. Acetone and IPA is generally not used. However, it is allowed. For hydrocarbon solvent extractions, you can use butane, propane, pentane, hexane only for hemp. They, for whatever reason, would not allow for it for marijuana, and then heptane as well. Now, these solvents are approved not only for primary extractions, but also for post-extraction refinement or secondary extractions or tertiary extractions. Now, if anybody's using anything outside of these solvents, it's technically considered adulterated in Colorado. This is just, some photos of different concentrates that you'll find. So this is CBD isolate. It's crystal. It's very pure. Excuse me. Pure and white, or sometimes creamy. This is called shatter, and this is from a butane propane extraction. So you'll kind of see that the golden orangey color. You'll find that different solvents will give you different color concentrates as well. This is live resin, so you'll see there's a lot of chlorophyll that's included in that that you're pulling from, and it's not a solvent. It's not extracted through solvents, but more generally through freezing of the plant, and then they'll use sometimes solvent-less extractions to extract it. Sometimes they will use solvents to extract it as well, but what you see here, the green color, you'll see a lot of the chlorophyll that gets pulled. And then this is going to be keef, and this is from a mechanical dry sift extraction and with water as well. And so, yeah, it's just, like I said, just different types of products with different solvents. This is called wax, and this is from a butane extraction. Very different in color from this one, where it has butane and propane as a solvent. This is more of a beige color, and that's generally what you'll find when you're extracting with butane. And then this is just, I believe this is isolated THC, delta-9 THC. This is the color of the extraction that you'll generally find when it first comes out of the extractor. Again, this is a butane extraction. If you have a propane extraction, it's more bright orange. This is CBD isolate. That it was just a science experiment, waiting, just to allowing it to crystallize because it was very pretty. This is a distillate, so this is after the primary extraction. It's been refined. It's gone through short path distillation, and you'll find it's more orangey in color. And then here is actually not a concentrate. This is actually terpenes that was pulled off of a concentrate, and it was because terpenes are extremely volatile compounds. You can pull them off, and then you can introduce them into the finished product later to have that flavor. Otherwise, you just lose all of that. You generally don't find it being this color, and that's why I took this photo. Generally, you'll see it more this orangey color, but this was actually a very beautiful terpene extraction. So what do we do with all of these different cannabinoids? Well, in Colorado, because it's Colorado, we like to take advantage of Rocky Mountains. And so we have the Rocky Mountain High burger. And this was actually at Carl's Jr., believe it or not. It was a CBD infused hamburger. Actually, not hamburger, it was the sauce. And it was just CBD isolate. It is allowed to be used at retail food facilities as long as they are getting it from an approved source and they have all of the documentation for it. And obviously, they cannot have anything that exceeds the 0.3% delta-9 THC because it needs to meet the standard of identity for industrial hemp. Other things that you'll find, they'll take the fan leaves, they'll sugar it, and they'll put it here, you see on top of donuts. You'll have bath bombs, you have suppositories. You can even make your own cannabis tampons, and they show you how to do it, or you could just buy it. So there's all sorts of different products that are made. Something that Elsa is made that is really not allowed any further, or at least in Colorado, is using an inhaler, because what is an inhaler? An inhaler is a medical device that is regulated by the FDA. And so, like I said, the industry is extremely creative, and it takes a lot to keep up with everything that's going on. as well as making sure that anything that's going out into commerce is food safe. I'm just listing out, the different items here that, we would generally request of all of these operators to ensure that there's full chain traceability of everything. These are just very basic, and you can apply that, whether it's a cannabis industry or whether it is dietary supplements or whatever it is. But I'm bringing it up because there is a lack of training. Maybe not so much in Colorado, but maybe in other states that are similar to Colorado 2010, Colorado 2013. And so, it's not only training of regulators, but also training of the industry as well. I know that, I'm running out of time. I'm going to go through this really quickly. So listing out, again, basic food safety challenges. Products were recalled because they were using non-food grade ingredients. That specifically was something that I, had to educate not only regulators, but also the industry. Essentially what they were using essential oils not meant for human consumption, and they were infusing it into chocolates and tinctures. And so that was a huge recall, and that was in the marijuana industry. The other thing, this is a filter from an extraction machine where they were using butane propene mix to extract, and they have different filters, at different levels of the extractor. And when I was inspecting this, I was like, why, what's going on here? Like this should not look this way. And what we determined was because when they were using butane, they're constantly refilling the same butane cylinder that you would generally get from the grocery store. And with that, whenever you're extracting and they're doing this quote unquote closed loop cycle, they're pulling moisture from the plant material, which is then being sent back into the cylinder, and the cylinder is actually resting on the inside. And then they're using that same cylinder, that same solvent, and then extracting cannabis. And so that's, it was one of those things where it's like, okay, you guys, you have to look at what you're doing and make sure that it's safe. So we were able to correct it after that. But, just the things that you don't see unless you're actually in the industry. And then, of course, we have all sorts of pests. We have lots of roaches. I know that you are laughing inside, or nobody's listening to you laughing, but that's what they call them. I didn't know that these were called roaches, but there you go. This is a slide that I wanted to spend a little bit of time on, just so that you are very aware that there are various THC isomers that are available out there. You have Delta 6, Delta 8, Delta 10, exo THC. You have so many different types of isomers out there. And that's why you kept hearing me correct myself when I would say THC, and then I would say, I mean Delta 9, because you have to understand which THC are you actually talking about. Now, different states have different ways of regulating this. Florida, for instance, they kind of let you do whatever you want. You can do the different isomers. They basically say, hey, to the hemp industry, hey, if you are meeting the standard of identity for industrial hemp, which is less than 0.3% THC, you are compliant. They do not care if you are producing, the THCOs and Delta 6s, Delta 8s, whatever it is. However, you'll find in other states, specifically Colorado, you are not allowed to synthesize anything that is outside of the naturally occurring cannabinoids. You can refine what is already existing. So you can refine concentrates to produce CBD. However, you cannot tweak it and then try to produce Delta 8 out of your CBD, that's really what the industry is doing. So, different states have different regulatory requirements. And, I pulled up, these different bills, regulations, acts, whatever it is, just so that you can understand kind of where, how it's just so confusing for everybody. So obviously the Farm Bill 2014, 2018 does, really just tells you, hey, hemp is legal. We're taking it off the Schedule 1, like you can have interstate commerce. But then if you look at, the Federal Analog Act, and I'll read this to you for those of you who can't read it, it says, let's see, Controlled Substances Act, any chemical substantially similar to a controlled substance listed in Schedule 1 or Schedule 2 to be treated as if it were listed in Schedule 1, but only if intended for human consumption. So if you look at that, that's where the federal government is saying, hey, y'all can't make these. You guys can't make your Delta 9 out of from CBD. You can't do any of that because it might be a Schedule 1 drug. However, you'll see here, it says, except as provided in paragraph C, the term controlled substance analog means, and this is really just going to support kind of what we've been saying all along. So the chemical structure of which is substantially similar to the chemical structure of the controlled substance in Schedule 1, Schedule 2. These are all similar. Same with someone manufacturing or synthesizing Delta 9 from CBD, similar to the chemical structure of THC, Delta 9, which has a stimulant, depressant, or hallucinogenic effect on the central nervous system that is substantially similar to or greater than the stimulant, depressant, or hallucinogenic effect on the central nervous system of a controlled substance in Schedule 1 or 2. I'm not going to read this last one, but essentially you understand what I'm saying. There's a lot of talk about this because we're talking about, okay, well, if you're synthesizing this, can you define what synthesis means? And then is this going to impact not only these psychotropic, psychoactive THCs, but how is this going to impact, say, CBN or CBG? Although CBG, you can actually grow plants that are very high in CBG, and you can extract it and refine it that way. However, CBN, something that we will use for sleep, they're synthesizing that. So I think there needs to be more discussion and more research into kind of the different pathways to synthesize these different cannabinoids, and then determine, which regulatory path we're going to proceed with. But again, the states alone cannot do it. It's just a lot of information. I'm gonna flip through the last few slides because, oh my goodness, I'm running over. Developing of different standards specifically for testing. And then there's my contact information if anybody's requesting any information. And I'm sorry I went over, Amanda, but if we have a few questions, I can answer them.